Welcome back to the Mental Health Matchmaker podcast. I'm your host, Brooke, and today I am joined by Dana, a registered therapist who supports individuals, couples, and families through life transitions, emotional regulation, relationship challenges, and more. In this episode, Dana helps us break down attachment styles, what they are, how anxious and avoidant patterns develop, and what secure attachment actually looks like in practice. We also explore how trauma can influence the way we connect and what it really takes to move toward more secure, emotionally safe relationships. Let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
I want to dive into attachment styles and attachment theory. But I also think because we talk about these things a lot and because they're sort of making their way into more mainstream media and books and podcasts, I am curious about like a basic definition of, if you wanted to start with attachment styles or attachment theory, like that world of attachment on a basic level for people that are listening that are like, oh, I hear that a lot, but I don't really get it. Can you go into that?
Right, yeah. So it's definitely more mainstream now, just like the word trauma or, other topics we'll dive into today. But essentially what attachment is, it's not just emotional closeness, like how close we feel to other people and how we relate to them. It's how safe we feel with other people. So attachment basically comes from our early childhood experiences with our caregivers or parents. And that's where we first learn what closeness means with our caregivers and parents and the people we first have in our lives, essentially. So there are four main types. So secure attachment is 60% of the population, actually. And
Really?
Yeah. And the insecure attachment styles, which are anxious, avoidant, and disorganized or fearful avoidant styles, those are the rest of the percentages split up.
Okay, whoa. I need to pause to say, like, that is not what I expected. In my head, is secure attachment sort of the goal?
It is in a way an ideal. All secure attachment means is that you're comfortable with closeness, with relationships with other people. And by the way, this is not just romantic. This can be friends, family, and also, of course, romantic relationships.
Okay.
But it's the sense of I can be close enough to you, but I'm okay alone sometimes. So if you need distance, I'm not going to freak out. But also, I want to be close to you and build a relationship with you.
Right. Okay. That gives it a little more room than what I expected. I think I tend to like box myself in very easily in the like anxious attached style in that box, but maybe there are parts of me that are more secure than I realized.
Okay. Well, moving on to anxious attachment style, actually,
yes, please.
Yeah, so I can relate to that style too, actually, as well. But essentially, this attachment style tends to be more, let's say, proactive in relationships. They need a lot of reassurance.
Yes.
So it's definitely that, but that doesn't make them, monsters or clingy or overbearing necessarily. It's just in childhood, our caregivers were a little bit unpredictable. Like sometimes maybe mom and dad would be closer, and other times maybe either mom or dad would blow up at you. And then that kind of taught you, well, I can be close, but at the same time, is everything okay? Am I going to get criticized or ridiculed for something, or am I doing this right, essentially? So it's this weird feeling of maybe feeling like you're not enough, or maybe some other people might feel like they're too much even.
Or both at the same time.
Or both at the same time.
Crazy experience when you feel like you're too much and not enough at the same time.
Yeah. So this might show up, texting, why don't you show up here for this event? I thought you were going to reach out to me. And that person, if they don't give you reassurance, then you might think, oh, I'm I'm not really sought after right now. I'm feeling a little unlovable.
Oh, unlovable. You mentioned like being tending to be like super proactive. I definitely relate to that, or sort of even similar, like over explaining myself when no one asks for like the particulars of what it is that I'm trying to say. But it's like I've already jumped ahead to all of the possible responses I could receive.
Right.
The ways I could be criticized, the ways that I maybe could be misunderstood. And I'm like trying to, in that initial part of a conversation even, trying to like already cover all my bases, which is like really tiring.
It is, and it's definitely exhausting and maybe the style doesn't think of it immediately, right? And I'm sure we'll get into it a little later down the road with couples work. But there's a fear of rejection underneath, actually. It's wanting closeness, but thinking, maybe there's something wrong with me, or maybe I'm going to be rejected by this person. Maybe the other shoe's going to drop.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So can we talk about avoidant?
Right. Yeah. So if we think of anxious as, the internal locus of control, just to use a fancier term.
Ooh, I love that.
But essentially, anxious people are actually avoidant within themselves, because it's really hard to face those anxious feelings. They just want to get rid of them immediately. That's why they want to resolve conflict right away in whatever relationship they find themselves in.
Okay, you're blowing my mind.
Yeah.
I feel like 2 minutes in.
Yeah. Well, now avoidant attachment style, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. And we don't think of this because they tend to avoid conflict and they don't want drama. But it's really an intolerance to tension. In relationships, particularly.
And not being able to like sit in the discomfort.
Yeah, but it's more like they need alone time to regulate, because it's really hard for them to manage those internal anxieties they have. And they'll also similarly have a feeling of, I'm not good enough, so, I'm not going to try, so I just end up failing.
Wow. Okay. So then you find a lot of relationships where there is one person who's anxiously attached and the other person who's avoidantly attached.
Yes.
Because that sounds like the perfect pairing.
Yes.
To keep both, working in that way.
Yeah, that's a very common pairing, especially in couples. It's the anxious avoidant cycle. Where you have the let's say a conflict pops up and you have one partner like, hey, why won't you text me back? The other one might think they're overbearing and say, well, I'm at work, what do you want? And then they'll withdraw a little bit, and then the anxious will pursue again, because it's like, what's going on? They're not really responsive. I'm freaking out over here. And that'll cause them to withdraw more. From their end, it's like, okay, my partner's being a little like overbearing. They want responses out of me. Whoa, I'm just going to back up here. Well, the other one's like, I need that responsiveness.
Like the more you pull away, the more I need to resolve this. And it gets louder. And then the other person's on the other end being like, the more you push and try to get something out of me, the more I withdraw.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's stressful
to
think about. Because it's like, is it possible also, side note, is it possible for there to be different combinations of attachment styles? So like, could one person be anxiously attached and the other person be secure?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that pairing might tend to do a little bit better than avoidant secure. Avoidance might even make a secure person a little bit anxious.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So generally, I talked about how avoidant forms in childhood. Anxious. I talked about how anxious forms in childhood. Now, avoidant, on the other hand, because their caregivers were maybe really inconsistent, or actually more on the neglectful side, or maybe they didn't really talk about emotions or feelings growing up. That just wasn't a thing. Well, they had to deal with it themselves, and they had to regulate themselves constantly. So they learned to be more independent.
Okay, yeah.
And they learned to rely on just themselves because they didn't really have anybody to.
Okay. That's so interesting, which I almost has like similarities to the anxious side of it as well, like with the inconsistency. So on both ends, it's like a lack of secure closeness that feels safe.
Yes.
But showing up as a result in very different ways. That's fascinating.
Yeah. So those are the insecure styles. There's one more I'm going to get into in a second here.
Yeah, tell me.
But secure just basically had that balance. If I needed comfort, my caregivers gave it. If I needed space, same thing. So they learned to be more balanced. That's not to say that secure people don't lash out or get patient or aren't, human.
Yes. And it's also like important to mention that we're not also pedestaling them, like putting the secure on a pedestal as if people that have anxious or avoidant attachment styles are like inferior in some way.
Exactly.
Right.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. Because I've done that before. I've like put the secure person on the pedestal, even though there are parts in me again that are secure. But if I box myself into that anxious attachment style, and I also sometimes find it easy to put myself down or feel like I'm this burdened person, and the secure person is like above me or something.
Right.
Interesting.
Right. So the main thing to keep in mind is that both anxious and avoidant have things they need to work on. And by the way, attachment styles are malleable. That's a very common misconception. It's like once you have it, you can't get rid of it. No, that is not the case. They are formed patterns in our brains from, let's say, years worth of experience with our caregivers, but that doesn't mean they can't be rewired.
That is nice to hear. That's nice to hear.
It's not permanent.
Yes. And I think it's cool when you start to notice the shifts in yourself, which like for me through therapy, noticing wins in my own experience where I've like reacted or responded differently in a way that feels like, I'm noticing that I'm operating from a place where I do feel more safe in certain relationships or certain dynamics. Those are cool moments as well when you notice that secure attachment feels more possible for you, or that you're living into that more.
Absolutely. I want to touch on that for a second too, since you brought up such a great point. And that's whether it's an individual therapy or a couples therapy, the goal is to have that shift. So for like the anxious person to learn to self-regulate, emotionally regulate themselves to the point where they don't need that reassurance as much. They can get it from themselves a bit more. So then that way they're not overburdening, so to speak, others, which is their exact fear. They don't want to be rejected. They don't want to drive people away, but actually that behavior might end up doing exactly that.
Stressful.
I know.
That's so stressful. So,
yeah.
I know you're going to get into another attachment style, right? Is there another one?
Yes, there's another one.
Okay.
Anyway, wait. So one more thing with the avoidant attachment style, it's the opposite. They need to learn to stay with the conflict. So like be able to manage their emotions better internally as well. So that's how they're very similar. And this leads us to, disorganized attachment style or fearful avoidant. This is a push and pull style. It's a bit more complicated. It's like having a mix of avoidant and anxious traits. I want to be close to you, but not too close. And this tends to arise a lot of the time with, I see it a lot in clients with trauma or a bad relationship history or something like that, where, they've been burned before and they don't really know whether to approach or withdraw. And same thing with, again, early childhood experiences can tie back to this. Like some of them might have like a narcissistic parent where, they had this controlling or manipulative dynamic with them, okay, I don't know whether or not I'm coming home to something good or bad here. Or even like, let's say an alcoholic parent, you don't know if they're going to be in a good mood or not.
Yes, the unpredictability of it.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, so all three insecure attachment styles definitely can move towards secure. I think that's the main idea here. And yeah, like you said, secure isn't this absolutely perfect pedestal standard, but it is a healthy way of being close, but not too close to our friends, family, and relationship partners.
So it's almost like having a balance where you still experience a bit of a range because you're a human being, not a robot. But there's a baseline you come back to and a level of balance that is maintained.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I love that. That makes a lot of sense to me now. Can we segue into talking about couples and relationships more?
So segueing into that, actually, coming back to the anxious avoidant dance I mentioned, I do see that, and I actually brought this up to my supervisor at one point, why are there so many anxious women and avoidant men? Now, a lot of it has to do with socialization. Guys are taught to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and not cry and not show emotion and just man up in every instance and, basically embody this like masculine, I'm just angry and whatever. This is how I deal with my emotions because that's the only appropriate way. And so on. And women get this kind of confusing message of, okay, we're actually allowed to be emotional. We're allowed to talk about our feelings, but at the same time, we can't express them everywhere, or, we get like conflicting messages about that. So I think that's why the anxious attachment style tends to also be a contributing factor into how women are generally more anxious and guys are generally more avoidant.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And obviously as a woman, that there's also this thing that's bringing me back to what we initially said about this sort of fear of being too much and fear of not being enough. What are you supposed to do with those opposing messages and all the things that you feel as a result?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It ties into the broader scope of how we relate to one another. And of course, I'm not just talking about like straight couples, but that's like the majority of who I see, for example. But it can show up in LGBTQ, the same dynamics, because each one of us will form different attachment styles based on our experiences. So like within a couple dynamic, I like to use this metaphor because oftentimes people come in complaining about, let's say, communication problems. It's not really about communication problems. It's about maybe that feeling underappreciated underneath it.
Okay. Yeah.
So I like to use this metaphor, and I'm going to tie in couples and attachment work here, which is you're both on a balancing platform. What one partner does affects the other. Are you going to choose to pull away? Are you going to choose to reach out to one another? Or are you sidestepping back and forth and making it a really rocky platform above water, let's say?
Can I ask a question about, so conflict is a part of every healthy relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I want to say unfortunately, because sometimes when conflict rises, it just sucks. And it's like, it's like hard to remind yourself in a moment when you're with someone that you love. I'm using a romantic relationship as an example, that like, oh, even we can't avoid this. Like, even we cannot escape the fact that conflict will be a part of this. What would be a healthy response to conflict if someone does feel like they need space to regulate, but the other partner feels like they need closeness or like an explanation or to talk about it? Like, what could that look like if it was, not that it's ever going to be perfect, but what is something you could strive for or something you could aim for, I guess?
So first of all, I want to start by saying conflict is definitely a very healthy part of a relationship. It is definitely unavoidable. And it's something like Gottman says 70% of couples will have repeating conflicts, let's say, and maybe 30% of that is actually unresolvable. And it's not so much about having conflict, because think of it this way. You're two completely different people in a way, even two very similar people. If it happens, it happens, but they still might have conflict. But you're bringing two worlds together and two perspectives together. So there's a sense of we need to build a shared reality together, but also respect the fact that we have different outlooks on life and different perspectives on things. So it's not so much about the conflict itself, right, and needing to resolve it or avoid it. It's more the idea of, okay, how can we actually repair, and how can we strive for connection here rather than it being about who's right and who's wrong.
Yes. That makes a lot of sense. The who's right or who's wrong sometimes is difficult to detach from. And then I guess you're kind of saying, the way that I'm interpreting it is like that the goal is like honoring both stories, both pieces of the puzzle, both perspectives, and finding a way that they can both be acknowledged.
Yeah, and bringing it back to regulation. It's exactly what I mentioned earlier of, maybe the anxious partner has to learn to step away and regulate as much as they want to pursue to kind of break that cycle. But then the onus is also maybe on the avoidant partner for re-engaging in the conflict. So it's about the avoidant dropping it, for example, and the avoidant re-engaging, because the onus is on them to bring it up again. And everything is also much more likely resolved when the storms have settled. Soft startups are something, for example, the more anxious partner, the one that wants to resolve the conflict right away, can learn to do very well. Because
Okay, so again, I'm saying the word could because this could look a million different ways, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So it could look like the more anxious partner takes a pause and honors the space that the avoidant partner needs.
Yeah.
And actually maybe even tries to draw from that ability to sit with themselves.
Yeah. And also the avoidant is also like, okay, it's now my responsibility to engage. That's what they must learn. And I can sit with this longer than I thought, this discomfort within myself, and re-engage with my partner because I'm not being attacked, actually. It's that my partner wants connection or wants reassurance. So it's about getting to those really vulnerable cores and core needs of each person.
Wow. Okay. I feel like I have homework to do.
I mean, it's always about what's underneath the issue, whether or not that's about chores or money or the kids or whatever the conflict is. It's usually about which needs are not being met. And it's about both people developing a shared emotional language where they can learn to recognize and actually practice responsiveness towards each other in a way that their partner is going to understand.
Wow, that's really interesting. And also, I imagine a key part of that is also some of the needs being met. I'm thinking, again, from the anxious perspective, would be like learning to meet your own needs.
Yes.
And again, we mentioned a few examples, but there are multiple attachment styles. No one's boxed into these for good and it's permanent.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about trauma? I know that's a massive word.
Yes.
Big topic and lots that falls under the umbrella.
Yeah, very big word. To keep it simple, trauma is not just what happens to us, like let's say a sudden shocking experience, or maybe it's ongoing chronic trauma, right? That we experience a really bad ongoing situation, like life at home, or like somebody in our lives is really wreaking havoc on our emotional energy. So trauma is not just what happens to us, but how the body experiences it and stores it. And I'm sure you've read, books on trauma stored in the body. There's a lot of truth to that. And oftentimes clients will come in and be like, I don't even know what I really experienced. It's so hard to put into words. I've worked with anything from, let's say, paramedics, where they might see something shocking on the scene, and some of them might even get PTSD from it. Like they'll have reoccurring like flashbacks or nightmares, like very vivid ones about like reliving a trauma over and over again. It actually even shows up in, let's say, a narcissistic relationship, like a parent or a partner. Believe it or not, people can actually develop PTSD from that too, if it's strong enough. But it's not a rule. It's not a one size fits all.
Right.
I'm just saying there's a possibility of that. And I find that really fascinating how relationally we can affect each other to that degree. So it's really about like this stored, this tension or fear in our nervous systems that's built up around this like unsafe environment where we needed it the most to be safe. This kind of unpredictability that shows up, especially if it's complex and ongoing, like something like CPTSD or complex PTSD. That we often even see in childhood trauma.
Right. So in the therapy room, like what is it that therapy can give us if we're dealing with something, again, such a big range as far as like levels of trauma,
right,
complexity of trauma, etc.
Yeah.
What can therapy give someone?
That is an amazing question, because the number one thing that people that experience trauma didn't receive, which is safety, that's what needs to show up first. It's building that safety and trust. And it's not like you can just snap your fingers and boom, your client suddenly trusts you and whatnot. But it's about showing up consistently every single time. Like that, you can demonstrate that trust, that reliability through the therapeutic relationship, and once I like to use this, actually, you have to go slow to go fast with trauma.
I've heard that, and I love that so much.
Yeah. So it's all about really staying, like, trauma-informed approach basically means you stay with the client in what they're experiencing, even if they don't know what they're experiencing yet or have experienced. So in order to detangle it and kind of make sense of it, and there's all these techniques like grounding and mindfulness and somatic work and all these wonderful things that clients can try. Like even writing and arts and the expressive arts especially can be really good for trauma work, journaling and so on. But what happens in a lot of cases is they won't even really remember what happened. For example, some clients of mine say, I don't remember what happened. I just know how I felt, or I can vaguely remember actually even that.
And is it also a thing where sometimes you remember an experience that you can recognize would be deeply painful, but you can't even access the pain that you might have felt because it went beyond what your body was capable of holding?
Even storing. So memories can definitely show up fragmented a lot of the time because they never got properly encoded.
Oh my gosh.
So one peer actually explained this to me when I consulted with them too, and it blew my mind.
Can you go into that a little bit more about the fragmented memories?
Yeah. So like, I'll use a client briefly as an example, but they had extensive childhood trauma, and they remembered bits and pieces. So it's like they remember bits and pieces of the story in no particular order because those memories felt, in a sense, timeless to them. Like they didn't really have a timeline. They didn't remember like what age they were exactly when blank happened. So it's really, I guess, a beautiful and definitely arduous process to be able to take like all those fragmented memories and like put them in an order and reflect it back to the client in a way that can help them process and release whatever tensions and trauma is stored.
Okay, so it is like what comes after the safety, if we can get to that point, is being able to process and release.
Yeah, and make sense of it in a way that feels deeply personal for everybody.
Yeah, so that
for any
again,
one person, I mean.
Yeah, because it is such a broad term.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of what it could look like if you're on one end of it versus the other, so that people that are listening understand that their experience is valid? Because sometimes I feel like comparison can come into it, or we think of trauma and we think like of the most extreme version of it. And so I think some people feel like it's easy to invalidate their experience if they're like, well, it's not that bad for me. And they might be like, I don't need help then. But maybe they could benefit still from therapy or...
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking of some different examples. I guess in general, we can bring it back to even relationships. Like if they experience like a push and pull dynamic, right? They're kind of reliving that attachment injury, and maybe that's for some people a little T trauma they might not recognize because it's more on the emotional end, you know, and sometimes when society thinks of trauma, they think, okay, you know, battered woman, you know, or whatever, for example, and then it's visible. So then, you know, then it's valid.
Then it's real.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is our internal world is so nuanced and so subjective, right? That, you know, who are we to say how deeply someone has experienced, you know, emotional pain or not? Right. And that's where in the therapy room, that's exactly what therapy is there for. It's to unravel, okay, you know, how much or not did this affect you? Let's process that. And there's a lot of shame around what people have experienced, right? You know, I like you said, I don't need to really talk about this, right? It's normal that, let's say, my parent yells at me every day or whatever, you know, because I'm such a bad child or whatever. But really, you know, it's how it's stored in the nervous system. Like that's real. Even if it doesn't seem like it's very impactful, right? But over time, right, there's a response that a buildup that happens.
I watched a movie recently and it was so good. I wanted to post it to the general Slack channel. Like I was like, I know the therapist will love this. It's called Come On, Come On with Joaquin Phoenix. And it's about his relationship with his nephew. And his nephew is going through a difficult time. He's like about 7 years old, I want to say. I could be wrong. But there's a moment where his nephew, I think, kind of wanders off and then they lose each other for a moment. And it's no one's fault. Like, it's just an accidental thing. But the reaction is so big from the child. Like, the child was like, you let me go away from you. And it clearly, based on the reaction alone that you see, for both of them, the way that they interpreted it and the impact of it, like, stuck with them and left a mark. And I think that is, I don't know, that came to mind. And I think that's another interesting thing that illustrates what you're talking about, how it is so nuanced too, because sometimes it can also happen in ways where no one was trying to do the wrong thing. Exactly. Even that can still there's moments that have an impact on us that are so real for us. Yeah. And then we experience that, you know, abandonment wound all of a sudden. And it's like such a small thing, but, you know, has a big impact. So another thing about trauma is oftentimes, I guess I'm thinking more like classic, you know, bigger quote unquote trauma, so to speak, like a narcissistic relationship that really erodes one's sense of self. Or it doesn't even have to be that. It could just be like an unhealthy dynamic. So that'll often show up where the person's sense of self like will be eroded. And I've even had people kind of say, I don't really know who I am anymore. You know, I feel like my self-esteem and everything
has gone away. Like my sense of self is no longer there, or I felt that, before I got out of that unhealthy situation. So that'll often show up too.
Okay. Yeah. So there's just so many variations of how this can show up.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who's thinking about booking into therapy but hasn't taken the step yet?
Oh, I'd say it's normal to be apprehensive, right? Some people never did therapy before, so they don't know what to expect. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions out there, but hopefully not so much with Instagram Reels therapists do nowadays, and all these wonderful things like this podcast. But I'd say it's normal to feel a sense of nervousness. It's normal to have questions about the process. And it's normal to imagine what it might look like. But really, what you have to remember is you just show up as yourself, and the same thing. I mean, the therapist is not there or shouldn't be there to put on a performance, but to show up as their authentic self too. Because at the end of the day, it comes back to what we talked about earlier, and that's connection. And really getting into the things we don't normally process on a day-to-day basis because we're so on autopilot.
Oh, this is such an amazing conversation. You're located in Mississauga, Vaughan, Markham in person, and then additionally...
and virtually.
Okay, amazing. Thank you for everything that you've shared. This has been amazing.
No problem. Thank you for having me.